Lexus and Toyota 3.5-liter V6, the 2GR FE, is a legend of an engine. It has been used in so many models. It is very reliable, very good if you take care of it. However, this engine has one Achilles heel: oil leaks. When they develop, you actually have to drop the entire subframe with the engine, transmission, underwagon pinion, and everything connected to it outside to fix that oil leak because there's not enough space in the car. This is a 2015 Lexus RX350 with, you guessed it, a 2GR FE. And it has developed that exact leak from the front timing cover. Everybody hears those words, their heart drops, because they know that basically we're going to have to disintegrate this entire car just to fix an oil leak with a few gaskets and some sealer. In this video, you're going to see us drive this thing right now on the lift, take the whole powertrain out of it, fix that leak. You're going to see the entire process from beginning to end. And when we take that cover off, when this engine is out of this car, you will see exactly why it leaked and why there's really nothing you can do to prevent it from leaking. Let's get to work. Let's grab some popcorn, let's sit down. As we watch this video, let's talk. So the 2GR FE engine, possibly one of Toyota's best engines, but not initially. See, this engine came out in 2005 in the Toyota Avalon, then later in the RX, actually, in the 2007 model year, then in the Highlander. Then it basically took over every single model with a V6. Variants of this engine can be found in some of the Lexus's rear-wheel drive model, like the IS and the GS. So this engine, when it came out in 2005, it had actually a lot of issues with the variable valve timing gears coming apart, rattling, and that actually continued for a long time until right around 2007, 2008 in most models. In some models actually continued until 2010. If you do a search on this engine problems, you're going to find a grand total of 3 total major problems. One of them is the front timing cover leak, which we are addressing here. The second problem is the variable valve timing gears rattling or coming apart. This engine, after the updates, which let's say happened after 2010, really did not have VVTi problems or variable valve timing problems. However, the front timing cover leak issue continues. And the third issue, and this seems to be potentially a salt belt special, head gaskets leak externally from rust. Head gasket material is metal. It corrodes and starts leaking externally. So something about this engine that many will say, and when it came out, this is what everybody said about it. Many will say it is inferior to the engine it replaced, which was the MZ series engine. Let us take a moment and remember the MZ series engine. When it first came out, I was a child, clueless to anything Toyota or anything, but when it first came out, the MZ series engine, it actually had a lot of issues. Some of you will remember the sludge issues with the MZ initially when it came out, and a lot of people called Toyota's V6s no good, but then, of course, that had to do with people not taking care of their car. Toyota responded, lawsuits, whatnot. That's not our department. But then the 2GR came out. And the 2GR FE is this engine you're seeing in this video. Actually got an update in right around 2017. It started earlier in the Lexus models, which was the 2GR FKS. And that also had initial berthing issues, and they were all resolved. And by now, you won't hear any issues with this engine. And now, the woes of people. The Toyota is slowly dropping its V6, replacing it with a 4-cylinder turbo and all that. Folks, if you own this engine, let's have a friendly talk here. Because you're going to watch this video and you're going to wonder, why did I buy a Toyota if I have to do this? And you're going to see the magnitude of this repair. It's not really humongous. And we're going to talk about the cost of this repair later in the video. But this engine is truly a good engine. It's well designed. It's very well designed. I've been inside so many of them and I can see the engineering touches. I mean, you look at other V6s from other manufacturers, timing chain issues continuously, oil leaks, everything. The problem with V6s, they're just too big with variable valve timing. I mean, there was a time where a V6 engine was tiny, small. This is not a small V6. This is an enormous V6, and you will see it in the flesh because of the variable valve timing. This is emissions technology, and I understand some people are opposed to that, and we wish we still have carbureted engines. I don't agree. Technology is good. Stringent emission requirements are good for the planet, the environment, and everything. The 2GR engine really has one weakness, which is oil and oil pressure. This is something that majority of people are unaware of. So the 2GR FE, when it first came out, had two rubber lines. And this engine, in this 2015 RX, doesn't have those, but there was a rubber line on the rear bank VVTi line. We'll talk about this also in the video. Then there is the oil cooler line, which this car does not have, but I'll perhaps put a picture right here so you can see it. These rubber pieces are notorious to get brittle over time, leak. Toyota did make an update where they got rid of the rubber piece, and it's a full metal line. If these rupture and the engine leaks oil and runs low on oil, this engine, unlike other Toyota engines which are resilient to low oil and low oil pressure, like the 2AZ for example, this engine does not take much to get destroyed. And when it does get destroyed, it just starts ticking, starts rattling, and it just does not have it. It does not like low oil pressure at all, not resilient at all. That's potentially one of its other Achilles heels, but it is not something that is normal operating conditions. Obviously, no one expects an engine to survive no oil or loss of oil pressure, but this engine is very sensitive to it. Also sensitive to oil filters and the oil filter housing. Get a wrong one, and we have problems, major ones. So in your ownership of this engine, you're going to potentially run into this problem with the front timing cover leak or a head gasket. If you have an older one, possibly VVTi gears. VVTi gears are extremely expensive for this engine, and that's the other problem. If you are a newer one, this is potentially the worst case scenario. Here's the engine coming out. I'll let you guys watch that video, and then we'll continue our conversation when we get back to the time lapse once more. So, the 2GR FE. This is probably not the way you're used to seeing your engine if you have one of these, but yeah, this is how the 2GR FE comes out of the car. Believe it or not, this process, and I know, here I go again, saying this is easy, because it is. This car was designed for this to come out of it, because this is how it was assembled at the factory. Basically, they put everything here, assemble everything, and just take it and actually put it in the car as it is in the assembly line. We're going to talk about the engine a little bit, but let's show you the car so you can see the empty engine bay on an RX350. By the way, this will be the same for Sienna, Camry V6, Avalon V6, Highlander, basically every single model that has a V6. It comes out exactly the same, except the RAV4. The RAV4 is very complicated. The subframe is now one piece, so that one is kind of tricky to do. But you have these alignment pins in the rear. This is where the subframe is going to mount to, and this kind of aligns it. It only goes one way. There's no multiple locations to it. There are three ways to do this job when it comes to the suspension. Some technicians will do it this way. To me, this is the easiest, kind of the safest way, because you take the axle out, You leave the strut in the car, you minimally change the alignment. You might have to adjust your toe a little bit, and that's it. You're not going to change your camber because you never took the bolts for the struts. You take your ball joint out, your brake lines, and all the speed sensor, everything stays in the car. Your axle's safe, it's right in front of you, you can watch it. The second method is to leave the strut in the car, take the whole knuckle down, leave your caliper in the car. And this is where you got to kind of program your mind what's staying and what's coming down. And it comes with experience. That method, I don't like it for one reason. You have to tie your knuckle down. Otherwise, it'll just flip this way and pull your axle out. I don't like it. Plus, this whole thing will be in your way. We'll look at it in a second. This will be in your way when you work on the front cover. The third method, which is my least favorite method, is pulling the whole strut down. You still have to leave the caliper because your brake line is connected. Not worth to disconnect it and bleed. It's just you're adding more work. You put the whole strut down, but then the strut will really want to fall over. So you have to tie them together, and now there's something in your way, really blocking your view. These are the three methods. You basically disconnect all the radiator hoses. You can see the radiator here. This is quite a view for the cooling fan. So you basically, two radiator hoses, one at the top, one at the bottom. AC lines, one here, one at the top. Both of these, we had to take the AC down. And then your shifter cable, fuel line, heater hoses, wire harness. And that's really it. And suspension, of course, but at the top, that's really it. Like I told you, this car is designed to be assembled this way. So it is relatively simple to just pull it down. Now let's talk about the engine a little bit. And one note I will say, and Eros noticed this the first minute he walked behind this engine. The spark plugs are very easy to replace. Now you don't have to pull the plenum. You see them? Just remove this bracket. 1, 2, 3. So this is an alternative way to do spark plugs if you think the plenum is too hard to remove. You just pull the engine out of it. It's a way. Let's talk about the 2GR. This is, to me, a beautiful engine. Beautifully engineered. This is such a tight package. Because folks, when you look at it, it's actually not a large powertrain. I've seen a lot of powertrains in my lifetime as a technician. This is not a large powertrain. This is a 6-speed transmission. Basically, every single Toyota at some point had the same exact transmission. This is the 2GR, and you notice when it comes down, it even comes down with the belt. I don't even take the belt. You take the belt outside, and this is exactly how it's going to go back in the car. And as far as harness, you have really two harnesses. This harness is for the engine computer, and this one is for the fuse block. Here's your ground for the battery, the terminal, and this is where it connects to the body. Here's another connection point, and that's it. Here's your fuel line. This is the vacuum lines for the active mounts. You have transmission lines that we disconnected, AC lines. There's not much to it. Then I'm going to answer one thing. In case you're a technician at a shop, dealership, whatever the case may be, and you're watching this and you're wondering about this platform. This was extremely difficult to get because these are being discontinued. This is a tool made by, it says Bosch on it, but it's actually made by Bosch for a company called Kent Moore. Toyota does not have a service tool for this. I don't know how they want us to remove it. We just had to improvise. Technicians usually use 4 jack stands, lower this thing on it, very dangerous, really not a good idea. This platform is actually made for, believe it or not, General Motors, for the Traverse with the 3.6 engine. This is what you use to drop the subframe exactly the same way. I'll leave the part number for this. Very difficult to find it. I had to wait months to get this. I ordered this before the shop opens, and it took months to get it. It's finally here, and we're going to hold on to it with dear life. The other tool is from Nissan, believe it or not. Nissan also has one for this, in case you can find either or, but it's going to be hard to find. This works really good. It supports the subframe right here. Just kind of holds it. But the cool thing is, in the back side, it has these 2 pins. You can kind of see them here. They actually go in a hole in the subframe, and this is not going anywhere. It doesn't slide. Even if you start you're doing head gaskets, you're trying to undo the head bolts, this is not going anywhere. This is more stable than this car is on the lift. Let's put it this way. A few more interesting things. If you have a Sienna, the older ones, Camry with a hydraulic power steering, this would be a great time to do them, because 1, 2, pull the rack. Super simple. This is your sway bar. You just move the sway bar, and there is that. Very simple. Now let me show you why we're doing this whole mess. This is the infamous front timing cover leak. There's a point, and you're going to see it when we tear it apart, where the head meets the block, meets the front timing cover. That's where this leak originates. Many people have the misconception of this banjo bolt leaking. I have yet to see one leaking. That's just a way for extended warranties to push you out the door, basically tell you, oh, replace the banjo bolt, clean it up, and send you out in your way. So yeah, folks, it's a front timing cover. When you see this, don't start wasting your money and kind of bring your hopes up and then down. I'm sorry to bring bad news, but I'd rather tell you the truth. It's always the front cover. So to give you an idea on timing with this, we started this right around 2:30. It is right now right around 5:30, 5:45. We're about to go home, and we're going to pick this up tomorrow. In the video, it'll be just a second, but for us, we're about to go home. Tomorrow, the plan is tear the front cover down, basically going to pull plenum, pull valve covers, pull the whole front stuff, and reseal it. And I'll show you where it leaks, how it looks, and why they leak. That's the biggest thing. I'll have Eros give you kind of a tour around the engine so you can see up close everything, your exhaust manifolds. This is kind of an interesting view if you haven't seen it this way. Alternator on these is very difficult. Very easy right now. It's just because you have this extension right here. When it's in the car, you have to pull it forward, and the radiator is right here. This makes it very difficult, but right now everything is very simple. And then the transmission, this is where the starter goes. I usually remove it. It's just easier that way. It's out of your way. But you don't have to. You can unplug the cable and leave it up. It stays with the positive cable. One thing about this car, it has had lower control arms replaced at some point. This is, how you knew them. These are originals actually, because this is the original sticker. And this is your 2GR FE in the flesh, literally. Guys, we're gonna wrap it up for the day. We'll see you guys first thing tomorrow, bright and early. Welcome to day 2 of the 2GR operation, and welcome to my new office. I actually like this. This would work really well as an office desk. Today's plan is we're going to tear the engine all apart. We're going to find where it's exactly leaking from, and I'll show you that. And then we'll start reassembling it, put it back in the car, and you'll hear this car running. So without further ado, let's get right to work. All right, so we got everything torn apart here. Let's first take a look at the point of failure. Majority of Toyota engines are designed this way and could be prone to this. Where the cylinder head, this is a cylinder head right here, and this is a cylinder block, and the front cover sits here. There's an area where the three meet. This is exactly where they always leak. If you look right here, there's an area which actually has wet sealer, and this is where it leaks all the time. And it almost has like a cutout where the cylinder head meets the block. If you have very little oil there, it's gonna leak. It's just a matter of time. And here we are with this. So why does this happen? Assembly. If you get just as much as a fingerprint here in this kind of hot area, you're gonna get a leak. And this engine actually has another leak, smaller one, from the front as well. You look here, you see that's kind of wet looking sealer in the middle. And that's also another spot where they love to leak, but the rear one is a lot more common. Now let's look at the front cover so you see those same spots and how they look like. You see how the area that was sealing looks, it has like an even appearance. You come to the area that caused the leak, it almost you see like a channel. And the same thing on the other side. You have this perfect channel that oil just runs through. This is the side that is leaking the worst. You see all the oil here. Folks, this is super common with this engine, and this is one of its Achilles heels. And unfortunately, this cover is so big. I mean, look how big this thing is. It's very wide. So you cannot remove it in the car. You can in some models, but it's such a tight squeeze that you end up smearing the sealer and it ends up leaking again. It's just not a good idea. Drop it like this, get it fixed right once, and we're done. Let's take a look at the 2GR in case you own one, you're curious how they're designed. Starting with the front, this is a 3-chain engine. So you have, this is the main chain. You see the paint marks are still visible. That means this chain is actually good. Guides, tensioner, and this is an idler that has something very particular about it. It has a rubber block that when it's new, it actually wears the chain marks, indentations into it. So if you ever remove this chain, you actually have to line them up. There's indentations here. You got to line them up with the indentations of the chain. Otherwise, it could actually set timing codes or make the chain rattle unnecessarily. The other thing about this chain is, and this is kind of scares everybody when they work on it, this chain sits not very tight. I mean, you touch it here, it's tight, tight here, but you look at it, there's always a spot. And look at this. Look how loose that is. Some people will think this will make all kinds of noise. It does not. Because the minute you start this engine, this tensioner gets pushed with oil pressure and actually takes that slack off. So if somebody shows you this and tells you, oh my God, we got to replace the chain. If let's say you have a mechanic torn this part, you show you this, look, this chain is stretched. It is not. That is normal. I've taken these when they have 5,000 miles, when they have 300,000 miles. They're always like this. This is normal. Even when you put a new chain, that's how it is. And these are the infamous, or not so infamous, VVTi gears. Intake, exhaust, intake, exhaust. Fun fact about them, they're exactly the same. Exactly the same part, both sides. Just the way they time is different. They have actually marks for bank 1 and bank 2. This is bank 1, this is bank 2. The other thing is, 2GR has these little inner guides. They're completely plastic. Never seen one fail, ever. Maybe BMW ought to learn a thing or two about these. Other thing is, this engine has 2 more chains. We have the main chain connected to the intake, and then another smaller chain connecting the 2 VVTi gears together, and you have a little tensioner right here for it. Fun fact, same chain, same tensioner, just in a different orientation. Pretty cool design, and here's the valve underneath the valve cover where you see the valve train. This is a 2-piece cylinder head. This is one piece, and then the cylinder head itself. The top piece, which is called a cam tower, that's the kind of the mechanic lingo for it. This is what loves to leak on the V8s. the UR series V8s. I love the leak from this, but basically camshaft, rocker arm just sits there. There's a hydraulic lifter, kind of hard to see. You see it a little bit better here. And that's how the setup of the 2GR is. Very, very simple. This spark plug tube is actually pressed into the cylinder head. If you look at older models, they do not have a pressed in spark plug tube. They have a screw in spark plug tube. Stuff like the 5S, there's a special tool that unscrews these. These are not that style. These are just pressed in, and that's really it. There is something about the 2GRs that is kind of an internal joke, and I want to show you this. Every time you remove a factory original one, you have a gray sealer. The sealer we're going to use is black, and you have two trophies. One of them is this one, and one of them is this one. I don't know if other dealerships does this or technicians. We used to collect these on a ring. This just tells you how many 2GRs you've done. It's just silly stuff from the dealership days. But we're going to go ahead and clean everything. You're going to see there's extensive cleaning on this and in the front cover. Front cover also houses the oil pump. Here's that oil pump. There's actually a pretty cool special tool that a fellow technician did, a Lexus technician at a dealership. Huge shout out to him. I'll try to find his information and put it. There's a special tool that sits here to line up the oil pump with the crank, so you wouldn't have to kind of manually do this. It just goes on. You'll see it when we assemble the engine, and that's really it. There's one more thing I want to show you that I have talked about in my previous videos, and you might want to see. These are the two VVTi lines that supply the cylinder head with oil. Now, the one that has a problem is this one, the big one. In the older cars, this was a rubber section in the middle. Now this is all metal. You can upgrade them to all metal part, but you have to look up a part from a different car. Like if you have an older Lexus that has the rubber part, look up a 2015 Lexus, find the same line, and that'll be that. And then the filter, take this filter up. This filter actually sits at the banjo bolt. You see it sitting on that one. This filter rarely gets dirty, and people always are concerned about cleaning these. I have never, even with dirty inside engines, I've never seen these clog. It's just there to pick up heavy debris, which this engine of course doesn't have. This is super clean and good. So these are really the odds and ends of this engine. Pretty straightforward once you get it down. It's actually pretty simple to tear it apart. There's not much to it, but here we go. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start cleaning on this. We're going to completely assemble it, put it back in the car. It's all going to be time-lapse as we talk about a few things. And then we'll catch you guys up once we have everything back in. We're ready to start the car for the first time.
Well, hello again, and I hope you had a refill of the popcorn. This section of the video, I want to talk to owners of 2GR FE. In case your blood pressure is already high, let it come down. Let's talk. First thing we're going to talk about is the cost. Second thing is, who should you have do this job? Third thing is, what should you do if you have this job and the thought of, is this even worth it? Is this car worth repairing this? And what should you do? First thing is the cost. The cost of this job was just underneath $2,600 or $2,600. A lot, but you can see that it is labor intensive, and it is labor intensive. Parts, you're talking about a few gaskets here and there, nothing really expensive. Sealer, some oil, oil filter, coolant, that's really it. Parts are not much, it's all labor. And something about labor that I want to share with you briefly, the labor rate for this is all over the place. Not two dealerships will give you the same quote. The reason for that is the inflation of the price in the labor guide. This job originally called for 24 hours in the book, actually 24.7, so almost 25. I don't go by the labor guide for these jobs. I look what the labor guide says, and then I adjust from there, and I adjust down. And the reason for that is, I think 20 hours is what I ended up charging this customer is more than fair for me, fair for them, keeps the job relatively doable, and I basically have to shut down my shop for almost 2 days. So I have bills to pay and rent and employees. So this is fair for me and fair for the customer, because the factors that change this time is this a rusty car, which this is not? Is this a car that has an oil cooler line, which makes it a little bit more difficult? It has not. And the major factor that immediately defaults this to the labor guide time: has this engine been taken apart before? Because if I'm dealing with an engine that's been taken apart before and it's leaking again within a year or two, something went south and I question the quality of the repair. So I'm going to find a lot of broken stuff, a lot of things that are not done right. The sealer will be applied incorrectly and it'll be a nightmare to clean. So if this is a factory setup, it lowers the labor time for me and keeps it something fair for both. Let's talk about who should do this job. See, most independent shops will run away from jobs like this because it ties up a wreck. But the biggest thing is the liability. See, if this job goes south, it'll leak again. That's the best case scenario. It'll leak again. You have to redo it all over again for free. But the worst case scenario is if you're not experienced, even if you're a good mechanic, if you're not experienced with this engine, which has a lot of stuff that could really go south very quickly, you could have a catastrophe where the engine fails after this job shortly. Within a week, it'll just blow up or have loss of oil pressure. I already told you this engine is very sensitive to oil pressure. Case in point, if you have the upper oil pan has two O-rings. These O-rings are vital to the life of this engine. If you misplace them, don't know about them, that is the passage to and from the oil filter. If you don't put them, you have complete loss of oil pressure. It'll grenade this engine almost within 5-10 minutes, basically. So there's a little waste to this engine. You gain this through experience. I worked at a dealership. I've done these on brand new cars. I've done this with cars with hundreds of thousands of miles. So this is how you gain the experience. Now, there are shops out there that will take jobs like this. Usually they'll have one person experience. They will teach the younger guys and they will pick up the experience and will keep going. Don't go to a random shop that all you see them do is brakes and exhaust and suspension and ask them to do a job like this. Most of the time they will tell you, we're not doing a job like this. This is way too much for us. We don't want that liability. We don't want to hog our lift for 2 days for a job that we'd rather do brakes and simple stuff. Go to a shop that's done this job. Doesn't have to be a dealership. Yes, the dealership will most likely be experienced with this job. I've worked at a dealership. I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of this job over and over and over. This is important. The person doing this job needs to know what they are doing, as in not be a good technician or a mechanic. They could be a good mechanic, but they need to be very familiar with this engine. There's a lot of little things that could make this job go so south, you wish you left it leaking. So be careful with that part. The other thing is, what do you do if your 2006 Avalon, 2007 Sienna has this leak and you're wondering, is it worth it to fix this car? And I'll share with you the conversation I actually had with the owner of this very Lexus. He was one of my first customers for first week or two when we opened the shop. I've never worked on this car before. He came in wanting front and rear brakes. Well, I got him the part and we're ready to do this. I pulled the car, pulled the wheels. The brakes are perfectly fine. I told him, we're not doing the brakes. There's nothing wrong with them. He said the dealership just told him that he's going to need brakes. Well, he didn't. That was unfortunately a mistake. But I told him about the front timing cover leak, and not for the intention to have him do the job. I told him, by the way, if you notice a few drips, if you notice a slight oil smell, the front timing cover is leaking. Let me show you. This is very common with this engine. It's not really that bad to a point where it's covering everything, but you need to be aware of it. We can clean it, keep an eye on it. If it gets really bad, you can either address it or clean it again, whichever works for you. Initially, he listened. He said, okay, well, let's just keep going. But after maybe a few weeks, he called. He says, you know what? I love this car. I want to keep it for a long time. I don't want my car leaking oil. I don't mind paying the high bill for it. I want it fixed. And you know what? That's their choice. But for you, if you are wondering, is this job worth it? In this case, 15 Lexus RX with 110,000 miles, it is worth it. I mean, the car is in excellent shape. It's an impeccable shape. The owner really took care of this car and he loves it and he wants to keep it for a long time. But in case you're not, let's explain what actually this oil leak does from functionality of the car standpoint. So this oil leak is not a gushing oil leak. It is not like the oil cooler line that we talked about that ruptures and leaks the entire capacity of the engine of oil in a matter of minutes. This is not that leak. This is the kind of leak that you clean it, give it a month or two, it'll reappear. And give it a year, it'll cover everything. But it's slow. And what makes it cover everything is when it starts dripping on the axle. And it just happens to be designed, almost designed in a way to leak exactly on the axle. And the axle is spinning as you drive. It'll throw that oil everywhere. Recently, there was a video from the Car Wizard, who is a very respectable mechanic, shop owner. They had a RAV4 that had a mysterious leak. And actually, as soon as I saw that video, that is a front timing cover leak. Classic front timing cover leak that caused enough drips to drip on the axle. And it makes it look like the entire engine is just hemorrhaging oil. That is not the case, because once you clean it, you see nothing. And that's exactly what they had in the video. This is a classic front timing cover. You'll drive it for a month or two. You'll see a little bit of oil. You go into a year. Once it starts dripping in the axle, it's everywhere. So the problem is you have oil everywhere. It's going to start smoking. Eventually, it'll go in the exhaust and you'll start smell it, feel the smoke. Some people will really be bothered by it. If you continue to clean it, it's not going to develop that much. However, some people don't have the means to keep cleaning it and doing all this. This just doesn't work for them. In that case, repairing it is an option. In older cars, if you have any car before 2010, I highly recommend, if you're going to make this investment, change the head gasket as well if you're in the salt belt. If you're not, change the VVTi gears. It's a giant expense. It adds another at least $1,000 to this repair, if not more. But I highly recommend it. You do not want to open a 2GR twice in its life. You want to open it once. You get to, my ideal idea is you open it at 200,000 miles, you put updated parts, you really do the job well. It should last you until you're done with this car, basically. In the salt belt cars, they don't last very long because at some point they're just going to get so rusty that it's not worth doing anything with them. But you want to prolong the life of the car. This oil leak does not impede the life of this engine. It is not the kind of leak that will leak and then your oil level will be low. That's not this kind of leak. This is a leak that will cause smoke, that will cause bad smell, drips on your driveway. So if these three things bother you, perhaps you want to consider cleaning it first, drive the car. If a month passes and we're back to square one where you have the smoke and the smell, then consider fixing it. But if you don't, then what's the harm in cleaning the engine once a year and life is good? At that point, it's not a huge leak. But if it happens back within a month, yeah, perhaps you want to consider fixing it and getting it done with. But just make sure whoever fixes it for you knows this engine, not just be a good mechanic. They need to know this engine. That's vital because this could really go south, not just for it leaking again, but could harm the life of the engine if you don't clean it and do everything exactly the way it should be done. And with that, we're about to ready to start here. We're adding the oil, adding the coolant. Let's get this car started so you can hear it run, and I go finish the job as well. We have arrived at the moment of truth. Everything is hooked up, fluids are added. We did not charge the AC yet. Usually I start the car, make sure everything is good before we charge the AC, give it the final cleanup with all the covers. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and start the car. This is the actual first start. When the battery's been disconnected on these, you want to turn the key on, give it a minute for the immobilizer to communicate. Otherwise, the car will start and then shut off immediately. And we're going to give the radio a minute to load. There we go. You guys ready? Let's do this. Well, running pretty good. And take a quick peek. Sure nothing is leaking immediately. And nothing is leaking immediately. So that means we plugged everything back in. Life is good. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 2GR FE front timing cover reseal job. We do have quite a bit to go on this. I'm actually gonna just let it run for a minute here and shut it off because we gotta bleed the coolant. There's a specific procedure and it'll be very loud to speak over it. But we're gonna charge the AC, we're gonna clean up a little bit. There's always gonna be oil, spills here and there from this big job. You saw how much stuff got spilled, so there's quite a bit of cleaning. Test drive it. Sometimes we have to make an adjustment to the steering. Technically, we don't need an alignment, but we might recommend one to the customer depending on how it drives. Sometimes I have to recenter the steering because we took the steering shaft off, stuff like that. Let me shut it off and we'll wrap up this video. So, that is why I needed to shut it off, because we need to rev the RPM. I have a video on how to bleed these hinges if you want to see it, but this is basically the job. Looks more intimidating than it is. You absolutely need a lift to do this. There is no way to do it DIY, although there has been one YouTube video that have done this in the garage floor with kind of floor jacks. Very dangerous. I don't recommend you do it that way, but if you want to adventure off, then adventure off. Folks, for those that will tell you this can be done in the car. Yes, on certain models it can be done in the car, but even those models, I will still take it out and do it the way I did it. Reason why, you're not going to be able to clean it as well as we did with the engine sitting in front of you. You're not going to be able to make sure that you put this front cover in the car and not have any smears or dirt, or you're not going to have that control. And you're going to do this job and you're going to leak after a year. It's not worth it. If you're going to do this job, do it right or don't do it. The bottom line. And the debate goes on and whether this is worth it or not. That is up to the owners. If you don't want your car dripping oil everywhere, fix it. If you don't care about that, then don't fix it. It's really not going to affect it, as long as you keep an eye on the fluids and whatnot. But otherwise, this is the 2GR FE job. And to give you time perspective, right now it is almost 5 o'clock on day 2. Car is running. We're probably going to be working on this car for another hour or two. Charge the AC, clean up everything, drive it, adjust the steering, drive it again, and we're probably going to give it another cold start tomorrow, and then she's ready to head back to the owner. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you have yourself a wonderful day.